Wonderful. We'll give folks about another minute or so and then we'll kick things off. Welcome, welcome. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. We've got a good group here, and I just wanted to say welcome. My name is Emily Leitzinger, and I am a Senior Philanthropy Officer at American Farmland Trust. It is absolutely incredible to have all of these AFT friends, supporters from across the country for today's discussion. And really, truly, because of you, your generous and sustaining support supports the AFT's missions and programs. I'm really excited for the presentation today. We're going to be talking about the lasting impact of estate planning, how securing family farms and supporting thriving communities helps preserve the land that you cherish. As a bit of an icebreaker, we would love for you to use the chat to introduce yourself to us and the other attendees. If you'll share where you're calling in from or where you're joining from. We know that home is where the heart is, and we'd love to see where home is for you because it's Valentine's Day week and happy early Valentine's Day. So if you want to use the chat and tell us where you're calling or joining from, that would be great. Let's see. Oh, Damascus, the Plains in New York. West Central Indiana, right on. All right, we've Boulder, Colorado. We've got some folks from Maryland and Philadelphia and Georgia, Carolinas. Gosh, we really have just an awesome group of people from all over the country. Iowa, Montana, South Carolina, Western Massachusetts, Austin. I'll be in Austin at the end of the month. Awesome. Minnesota, Portland. All right, we got the West Coast represented from Maryland. Awesome. Well, we really appreciate keep that coming in the chat. We absolutely want to see where y'all are from, and happy Heart Day, everyone. Yes. Oh, that's cute, Alex. We really want to see where everybody's calling in from and joining us today. Thank you again so much for sharing. Yes, absolutely. We will share the slides for you as well. So, like I mentioned, we have a lot to cover, but before I turn over to the floor over to Paul, we do have some logistical items. Presentation will be discussed for an hour, so we'll have you for an hour today. I'll also be recording and sharing both the recording and the slides because there are some links in the slides that we want you to have access to. We'll ask that you please keep your audio on mute, but please definitely use that chat function and share ideas or questions in the chat. And before we review the agenda, let's do a little bit of a poll to continue to get acquainted with everyone. So Stephanie, if you want to put that poll up for us. Okay, so what inspired you to attend today's session? There's a couple of options here. You just wanted to learn more, you're considering including AFT in your estate plans, maybe you've already made a gift, or you're just curious about what AFT does and the impact. Go ahead and submit your answers here. Oh, cool. We're seeing some results come in here. Thank you so much for answering this question for us. Get us kicked off. Okay, so yeah, I want to learn more about legacy giving. I think that you are in the right place. We're going to go into this a little bit more in detail, but I love also to see that there's some folks who already made that planned gift or are considering that planned gift in your plans. So Stephanie, let's go to the next slide, please. Excellent. So here's our brief agenda of some of the things we're going to be covering today. We're going to dive into some specifics around estate planning, give you a really good high-level overview of legacy giving. We want to share our vision at AFT, and we're going to hear directly from some legacy donors, and then share how you can take some next steps if you're considering leaving that legacy. We'll have a chance for questions and conversation. And again, please use that chat feature, and we'll be monitoring that to make sure we bring these topics to the Q&A portion of the agenda. So let's go to the next slide. Awesome. So I want to take a moment to introduce you to the development team. These folks are the stewards of dreams and goals and would be happy to connect with you after the call today. So we have Lee up in the top right corner. Lee is our grand poobah. She's the Vice President of Development. Jerry, who's on the call today, Jerry is our Director of Farm Legacy and Senior Advisor, and he is happy to answer questions and share and help in any way as well. Willa, who's also on our call today, she's our fearless leader. Our philanthropy officers, Ash and Carissa, covering the West Coast, New York and New Jersey. And we're going to share these slides, remember, so you'll have their email addresses. So let's go on to the next slide. So covering New England and the Midwest, our philanthropy officers, Amy and Sydney. And as I mentioned, I'm Emily. I cover the Mid-Atlantic, Southeastern states, and Texas. And our presenter today is our Director of Planned Giving, Paul Caspersen. A lot of names I mentioned are folks who will be reaching out directly after this survey. And surprise, we're going to choose a winner from a survey that we send out after this call. And you could win an AFT branded thermos. So be sure to look out for that email, answer that survey, because we want to know how we did today and to get to know you a little bit better. All right, without any further delay, let's turn it over to Paul.
Okay, first and foremost, can you hear me, Emily?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. I'm Paul Caspersen. I've been with AFT since May of 2022, so almost 3 years now. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. I assume that you're here because the majority of folks here support AFT in some type of consistent way, or you might already be a member of our Farmland Forever Society, and we want to thank you for all you do to help AFT carry out its mission. So I want to start with just some specific trends as it relates to, the current federal income tax regime and federal estate tax regime, really just kind of as a primer. And then we'll get into talking a little bit about some plan giving techniques, and then just some overall ideas to keep in mind the next time you are revising your estate plan. So we'll go through kind of a comprehensive checklist. And please feel free to put questions in the chat when we get towards the end of today. I really want to budget time so we can answer questions. And of course, you'll have our contact information if you want to reach out to us afterwards. So let's talk first about a trend in federal income tax that actually is, you won't see it on our screen here, but it's part of the tax regime that was put in place at the beginning of 2018, and it was signed into law by President Trump under his first term. It's called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And the first thing that I wanted to discuss with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is that this was a monumental change to the income tax regime that we hadn't seen since 1986 in the United States. But it was temporary. So it's from 2018 through, you guessed it, the end of 2025. And so the plan was obviously that that regime would last under President Trump's 2 terms. Obviously, that didn't work out the way as planned, so we had President Biden in between. And although President Biden's administration did have an interest in making changes to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, unfortunately, they were just short a couple votes in the Senate to make the Build Better Back bill happen. So we're still stuck with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Many experts think that that may be extended for another 4 years. So we'll see how 2025 plays out. And so it's, since many of us are kind of operating under the chance that there is a potential extension, there's some things that I want to point out. One of the major trends that we've seen in the United States over the past several years since 2018 is a trend of fewer taxpayers itemizing their deductions on their income tax returns. And this has been primarily driven by changes introduced by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And the key reasons that we've seen so many taxpayers go with the standard deduction rather than itemizing is several things. Number one is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act significantly raised, it actually doubled the standard deduction for taxpayers. So, for instance, for a single taxpayer in 2024, the standard deduction is 14,600, and for married filing jointly, it's 29,000, almost 30,000. And just to give you an idea, before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, for a single taxpayer, that was like 6,000, and for married filing jointly, it was 12,000. So you had a lot more itemizers. 30% of Americans itemized before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and it's forecasted that under 10% of households will itemize by the end of this year. So not only did we see that increase in the standard deduction, there was a $10,000 cap on what we call SALT, state and local taxes. So as many of you know, you can deduct your federal and state your state and local taxes against your federal income taxes, but they put a $10,000 cap on that. And then finally, they took away all other itemized deductions except for one, two, mortgage interest and charitable giving. And so we're grateful that we still have charitable giving as an itemized deduction, but now with 10% or less of Americans itemizing, what we are finding is that the majority of our donors at American Farmland Trust, and we're very fortunate that many of our donors have reached the milestone of age 70 and a half, and they are able to make what's called a qualified charitable distribution from their IRA to charity. And so in order to benefit from an income tax perspective, you don't have to worry about itemizing. So more on that in the next slide. So that is just a little bit about income taxes kind of in the current regime. Let's talk about federal estate taxes just for a brief moment here. So the federal estate taxes, again, were increased through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Under President Obama, we put into plan a federal estate tax that was set at $5 million per person. $5 million per person. It was a permanent tax, and it was just going to grow a little bit with inflation on an annual basis. And if you're married, that plan introduced something called portability. So you could use each other's exemption. So for a married couple, it was $10,000, and that was put into place in 2012. And so the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act comes along, and it does another doubling. So it doubled the federal estate tax exemption, again, only though through 2018 through the end of 2025. Also growing with inflation. So to give you some idea, in 2025, the federal estate tax exemption is $13.9 million. So and for a married couple, double that. So almost 28 million before you would even have a federal estate tax. So, however, because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is set to expire by the end of 2025, and we still have no guarantee that there will be an extension of that, there is a chance that that federal estate tax exemption could revert back to the plan under President Obama, 5 million per person adjusted for inflation. So that number would probably be maybe 6 million, a little bit more than 6 million today. So these are some of the moving parts that are happening in the federal estate tax regime. Now, if you say, Paul, even if it goes back to the 5 million, don't worry, I don't think I'll have an estate, that will reach 5 million. So I'm not too worried about it. And that's okay. Now, there are 13 jurisdictions that currently impose state level estate taxes, and you'll see them there on your screen. And the state exemptions are much lower than the federal exemption. So, for example, in Oregon, the exemption is only $1 million. So anything after $1 million, you are taxed at 16%. It's not as high as the federal tax, but nevertheless, the exemptions are quite a bit lower. And in fact, just in some quick research, the highest exemption of all these states is Connecticut at about 9 million. So all of them are the states that you see there are somewhere kind of in between the 1 and the 9 million. So if you live in these states, then it's very possible that you could have exposure to state level estate taxes. Some people may be exposed to both federal and state level estate taxes, depending on, the wealth that you have. So those are some things related to estate taxes. And then the final point I want to make on this slide, and we'll keep moving along, is another landmark piece of legislation, again, signed by President Trump under his first administration, called the Secure Act. And I'm sure that just like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, many of you have read or heard about the Secure Act. And this was about a 2,000 page piece of legislation. So I can't pretend that I know everything about it, but there's a couple of key points as you think about your estate planning to take into consideration. What the Secure Act did above everything else is it eliminated the ability for most non-spousal beneficiaries to stretch an inherited retirement plan or an IRA. I'll use it interchangeably, IRA, 401k, 403b. But as many of you know, for many decades, if you left a retirement plan to a loved one, and if they were wise and they were sensible with inheriting a retirement plan like this, they could stretch. You probably heard your advisors or your attorneys use that term. And basically what that means is it's a life expectancy payout. And so it was a really wonderful income tax deferral for the beneficiary, because you got a 50-year-old son or daughter that inherits an IRA from mom or dad, and then she can take minimum distributions over her life, and she could even leave grandma's IRA to granddaughter, and eventually it would end, but that deferral could last as long as 90 years. Well, it was only going to be a matter of time, before Congress realized that they gave us maybe too much with that. And so that became the end of it with the Secure Act. So what this has done is that for most adult children who are usually, if anyone's going to be the beneficiary of the retirement plans at the end, it's usually going to be adult children. It's really forced them to take all the distributions out over that first 10 years. It has to be emptied out by the 10th year. So it's accelerating how quickly the children have to take it out, and therefore, of course, pay taxes at the federal and probably at the state level if they live in a state with state income tax. Now, there are certain what we call eligible designated beneficiaries that still qualify for the stretch, but they're usually not the main beneficiaries. So these would be minor children until they reach the age of majority, any beneficiary that is disabled or chronically ill, and then any individual that is, of course, no more than 10 years younger than the decedent, so ruling out most adult children. So what this has done is it was a tax increase, believe it or not, from an administration that usually is known for tax cuts. And so there are ways to use your retirement plans creatively, especially through different charitable planning techniques. We might even discuss a couple of those today, where you can not only mitigate income taxes for your loved ones inheriting these retirement plans, but also recreate that stretch that otherwise is lost. So if we have time, we'll get into that. I think that covers this slide. If you want to advance to the next one, Stephanie. Okay, so let's get into plan giving. So plan giving, really, my definition of it is it's a strategic way to support the causes that you care about, really enabling you to make a more significant impact than you maybe thought that you could possibly. It allows you to leave a legacy, support charitable organizations beyond your lifetime while aligning with your financial and estate planning goals. So, many of our Farmland Forever Society members are just wonderful, loyal annual donors. And then, we are very fortunate to receive uh, a gift at the end, which typically goes into the endowment at AFT, which, if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about endowment as well. The common vehicles that you would probably use to effectuate this type of gift would be including AFT or another charity you care about in your last will or your revocable living trust, depending on whichever of those documents you plan on using. Also, just simply using a beneficiary designation. So if you don't want to change your will or trust, just call your IRA custodian, Fidelity, Vanguard, whoever, and ask for a change of beneficiary form. And you can, add AFT as a small percentage of that IRA or a large one. We won't mind. But that's one way to make a planned gift without even, calling your attorney and having to update your estate plans. And then we get into a few more advanced type of arrangements. Charitable gift annuities. We have many donors at AFT that have set up gift annuities. It's a basic, very simple 2-page contract. I'm going to donate X dollars of cash or publicly traded stock, sometimes even other types of non-cash assets. And in return, they receive a guaranteed fixed income that they can't outlive. That's why we call it an annuity. And the rate depends on the age of the annuitants that we're dealing with. There's usually 2 annuitants max per these contracts. And of course, as you can imagine, the older the donors are, the higher that rate will be for them. We mentioned briefly qualified charitable distributions. We're very fortunate, again, as I mentioned, that many of our supporters are now starting to use this method. It's very simple. You call your IRA custodian and you give them some very basic instructions. I want you to send, X dollars, or sometimes some of our donors send their entire required minimum distribution because they don't need it to live off of. They'll send the entire required minimum distribution to AFT, or maybe split it up, between some charities. And the full amount that you can give through a QCD in 2025 is $108,000 per person. So we have donors that are able to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, if you don't itemize anymore because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, then this is a really smart way to still get an income tax benefit because you're avoiding the income, because it's just going right from your IRA right to a qualified public charity like American Farmland Trust. Stocks and bonds, easy way to, if you call your broker, they'll often just send over a few shares to our account, and just a great way to make a wonderful gift. Obviously, not only can you deduct the fair market value of the gift of stock if you itemize, but you also avoid the capital gain that you would have faced if you sold those shares yourself. So that's one of the advantages, of course, of making a gift of stocks or even bonds or potentially mutual funds. Now, before I go on to the next slide, I don't, Stephanie, were we going to do one more poll question? Okay, one more poll question out there for the audience, and then we'll keep things moving along. Okay. And I don't know if our results have come in yet, but we'll keep things moving along. Stephanie, if you want to advance to the next slide, we'll pivot to, there we go. Ensuring farmland is protected forever. I think we got the right audience on the call today, Stephanie. All right. So if you could go to the next slide. So now we talked a little bit about some trends based on tax policy, to consider as part of your estate planning. we've talked about just some basic plan giving vehicles rather quickly, but we talked about the most common ones. Now I thought what we would do is talk a little bit about things to consider the next time that you decide to update your estate plans. And then we're going to maybe talk a little bit about our Farm Legacy program, our endowment at AFT, and then start bringing things in for a landing and then answering questions from the crowd, from the audience, depending on the time that we have here. So we're going to walk through some key steps for keeping your estate plan up to date, especially if you've recently moved to a new state. That is one of the catalysts for sure to update your estate plan, among many, others, as they say, death, divorce, um, new family members, things of that nature. So let's dive in. So first and foremost, if you don't already have an estate plan, now is the time to create one. And if you do have one, it's important that you review it and update it regularly, to really make sure that you address these life changes. As I said, whether it's a move, a marriage, a new addition to the family, it can make your current plan, which you think is really bulletproof, outdated. And it's also important to work with a qualified estate planning attorney to ensure that your will, your revocable living trust, and your other documents reflect your circumstances. And this is especially critical, as I said, if you have one of these significant life changes, but also I feel like that has to be overstated today because many people are getting, I guess, they're being offered the ability to draft their own estate planning documents online, do-it-yourself estate planning. And so I don't think that there are certain circumstances where if somebody is comfortable drafting their own estate planning documents online and getting them executed, I would never stand in your way of doing that. But if this is one of those expenses that's absolutely worth it to make sure that everything is put in place. And often people will joke and say, well, I'm going to be dead, what does it really matter anyway if my estate plan is not up to date? Your estate plan has a lot to do with how you are treated later in your life as well as at your passing. I dealt with Lewy body in my family. I would think everyone on the call has dealt with loved ones that have had Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or some type of disease like that, that maybe they're in a position where they're not able to make decisions on their own. Another thing that I put up here that you may not see on a typical checklist for estate planning is called a letter of instructions. And this is actually a non-binding document. And this really acts as a guide for your loved ones and the people managing your estate. It could be your fiduciaries, like your executor or personal representative. It could be, a successor trustee. And think of this as a how-to manual for your estate, because your will and your trust determines who gets what, but it doesn't determine what needs to get done. So there are literally hundreds of reasons why you would draft a letter of instruction. For one thing, to help your important people find your assets, like bank accounts, safe deposit boxes, even real property, believe it or not, tangible property, key contact information for your advisors, your funeral and burial preferences, passwords and digital account instructions for managing your online presence. All of these things are really important that you're really not going to see in your dispositive documents. So again, while this is not legally binding, it's incredibly helpful to your family, executors, whoever. It saves them hours searching and really guessing during what is already a difficult time. Another critical step is to review beneficiary designations on your retirement accounts or life insurance policies. Many of you probably know that these assets actually transfer outside of your whatever is in your will or revocable living trust. And in fact, whatever you have on file with these providers, it could be your IRA custodian, it could be a life insurance company with a policy, whoever you have named as beneficiaries, by contract with them, that supersedes anything that is in your last will or revocable living trust. So you want to make sure that all these assets are coordinated and going to the right folks. Before I got into planned giving, I spent 5 years with TIAA-CREF many moons ago. And I couldn't believe how many folks, I'd ask them, hey, have you looked at your beneficiaries? No, not in a while. And it would usually maybe be an ex-spouse, or even worse, they may not have anybody, and it just says their estate. And many of you probably know that if you've never drafted a will and everything just goes to your estate, then your state has already drafted a will for you. It's called your state laws of intestacy. And those rules will determine who your beneficiaries are if you don't have a valid will. So just something else to keep in mind. Evaluating your executors and trustees. Usually folks name their siblings, they name, some of their best friends. And guess what? They're usually about the same age, and sometimes they're even older than you. And, so it's often important to look at those documents and make sure that these folks are on board with, with serving in that capacity, for one thing, and just make sure that they're in a place where they can do that for you. It may be important to plan for estate taxes, depending on where federal state taxes land. And also we mentioned state estate taxes. Just a couple more points I'll make and we'll keep moving here. What about moving between states? A lot of people did that during COVID. And this is a big one because estate planning laws vary significantly from state to state. One of probably the biggest differences between states that many of you have probably read about are community property laws versus common law states. And so, and basically you may say, well, I've never heard of that before. And basically the Reader's Digest description of community property versus common law is that the states that have established common law get most of their laws, that come way back from England. And for community property states, it may have come from either France or Spain. And so community property states, for example, are Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. And Alaska is kind of a tweener. They're in between common law and community property. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you've moved to a community property state, or if you've moved, let's say, from a community property state, one of the 9 that I mentioned, to a common law state, it could have an impact on your estate plan. So community property typically has unique benefits, like a double step up in basis for appreciated assets at the passing of the first spouse, which a lot of people don't know. And if you move to a common law state, you may lose those benefits unless you take the steps to preserve them, such as retitling assets or even creating something called a community property trust. On the flip side, you may move from a common law state to a community property state, and you may need to reclassify certain assets to ensure they're treated as community property. So this is why it's important to consult an estate planning attorney in your new state. They can help you navigate these differences and make necessary updates to your plan. Last point, and this is very important for our farm legacy donors, and I know my friend Jerry Cosgrove on the call would agree with this, is that if you have real estate or real property in multiple states, and many of our donors, they may have grown up on a farm and they inherited a farm, but they live they live across the country. So that means that they own real estate in multiple states. If you own real estate in more than one state, you could be looking at multiple probate proceedings in each of those states where you own property. So to avoid this, you may consider transferring your real estate into a revocable living trust if you haven't done so already. This can help streamline the process and provide privacy, for one thing, but it would also bypass having to go through probate, certainly in multiple jurisdictions. Sometimes it's bad enough to go through it in one jurisdiction. So I think I've said enough on this slide, Stephanie. If we want to advance, I want to leave time for our guests here. So I'll just say that, loyal donors are the foundation of everything that we do. They are steady hands that ensure that AFT can continue its mission. And we're so grateful for your unwavering support. These planned gifts that we talked about, they really enable proactive measures. So these gifts allow us to take bold, proactive steps to protect at-risk farmland strategically for future challenges and create opportunities for next generation farmers. And every legacy, is a promise for us in the future that we will be able to preserve more farmland. So we just want to, thank you for, even this consideration. Next slide, Stephanie. And as I said, every legacy gift builds a future where farmland is preserved. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize two extraordinary supporters of American Farmland Trust, Gary and Pam Clappell. They're from the Hudson Valley area in New York State, where we have a number of phenomenal supporters there. They've not only been faithful donors over multiple decades, but partnered with us through our Farm Legacy program and working with Jerry, who's on the call. Gary and Pam, I just want to thank you for joining us and have just a couple quick questions for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, great. Well, you've been connected to American Farmland Trust for many years now. Can you share what first inspired you to get involved with AFT and farmland conservation?
It was not what you would expect. It was actually before we were farmers, but I was a university professor and I began looking for cost of community services studies. And I found that American Farmland Trust did the very first cost of community service study. And as I continued my research as a professor, I actually became more and more interested in the mission that AFT was on, and we began making contributions way back a few years before we actually started farming. And then when we started farming, we found inspiration from the people at AFT, particularly in our local office in Saratoga, became friendly with some of them. Some of my students interned with them. So we developed a strong and intimate relationship with AFT. And so it was a small but significant step in thinking about, well, what about our farm in the future? And of course, that led us to Jerry and to making the contribution that we decided to make to preserve our farmland beyond our own time.
That's great. Thank you for that. And Pam, in addition to giving annually, you've decided to protect your land by including AFT through your long-term plans. What motivated that decision after you purchased the farm, and what motivated that decision, and what do you hope that how do you hope that will play out?
Well, like Gary said, we started farming very late in life. We were in our 50s before we took on 4 sheep and then grew from there. And we both feel that that was probably the most important thing we've done in our lives. And we wanted to be able to preserve the land that we've been protecting, and felt AFT. We've been so impressed by everybody at AFT, and felt very comfortable in including them in our estate planning.
Yeah, I would add that we love our children, our son, and but he's not a farmer. He left home before we began farming, and so he wouldn't have even if he wanted to protect that farm as a legacy to his parents, he really wouldn't know how to do it. Nor would he's a busy guy, and nor would he have time to do it. So we felt that making a gift to AFT of our land would protect, as Pam said, the most important thing we've ever done in our lives.
That's wonderful. Well, that's a great way to put an exclamation point on that. And I just want to thank you for sharing your story and for everything that you do to protect farmland in this very crucial area of the Hudson Valley, especially. And speaking of Hudson Valley, Jerry, if I could pick on you for a second, for anyone here who might be considering, just a basic, general plan gift, or maybe they do have some farmland, either they grew up on the farm or they're actively farming and they're interested in conservation, what advice would you offer, Jerry?
Well, I mean, the shortest advice would be to email or call me. I love talking with landowners one-on-one. So I want to, great joys of my work here at AFT now. I did some field work earlier on in my career, but now I work one-on-one with landowners. And certainly I'm always committed to making sure that depending on what folks' needs are, to try to steer them in the right direction so that they can achieve their objectives. That's always one of the most important first questions and conversation we have is, what does success look like?
That's great. Thank you, Jerry. Well, Stephanie, I think we can bring the slide deck just back up. I think we have like 2 slides left, 2 or 3 left, and we can make some final points and then leave some time to see if we can answer some of those questions in the Q&A, whether that's my attempt to answer them or Jerry's or whoever. Like Gary and Pam, you too can, help safeguard America's farmland for generations by including AFT through your estate plans, figuring out what works best for you. And some of you may have already taken this step, while others may be, open to this, this idea of conservation about, what you'd like to achieve and whether it's, preserving cherished farmland, supporting sustainable agriculture, or creating a legacy of stewardship. We encourage you to let us know, what would be most meaningful to you so we can partner in, making your long-term visions a reality. And so by joining the Farmland Forever Society, you'll help ensure that land that we really care about continues to feed communities, also protect wildlife, and bolster the rural economies into the future. Last slide here, Stephanie, and I'll turn it back over to Emily. Most of our planned gifts go to the endowment at American Farmland Trust. And AFT's endowment is really key to our long-term stability. By maintaining a 4% withdrawal rate, we protect that principle and continue to advance our mission year after year. And we hopefully believe optimistically that our endowment continues to grow. And the board ensures that our estate gifts, go into that endowment, strengthening our collective impact for generations. And what we've done over the past several years is that we have opened several endowment accounts so that if you live in a certain, geography that you really want to support your backyard with your planned gift, you can absolutely do that. We have a region for New York. We have a region for California, for instance. And there may be, depending on how significant your planned gift is, maybe you want to do something even more specific. And any of my colleagues that are on the call today could talk through that with you in more detail. So I've probably talked enough today, Stephanie, but I'm here to happy to answer questions. But I think for now, I'll just turn things back over to Emily.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Paul. I actually want to go off script a little bit here and go back to Gary and Pam for a second so that they potentially could speak directly to anyone who has questions for them. So Pam, Gary, why don't you guys come back on off mute and share a little bit about your story if you want to walk us through some of the mechanics and some of the ways that you've stayed involved with AFT.
Sure. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I think as Pam said, we started farming late in life. I was trained as an oceanographer, and Pam, who's the brains of the operation, has a degree in math, and was the business manager at a law school. So an oceanographer and an accountant. And we started farming because we've always sort of had an interest, even though we grew up in the suburbs, we always had an interest in farming. And we found that we could, if we didn't sleep that much, we could actually run a farm and run our other day jobs as well. But we ultimately realized at some point we're not going to continue to be above the grass, and we decided that we needed to start thinking about what we wanted to do with our farm. As Pam said, this was the most important work we've ever done. In addition to proving that two relatively old people could make a living farming, we also proved that we could put more carbon into the soil than we were putting into the atmosphere. We could restore biodiversity. We had wildlife running around our property, as well as sheep and poultry, which are the favorite foods of coyotes, but they never got any. And we learned that you can live a regenerative lifestyle and have a regenerative operation. And this was incredibly important to us, more important than anything we've ever done. And so we needed a place to go to figure out what to do with our farm. And we tried, talking to young people who might be interested in taking the farm and buying the farm or whatever. And nothing seemed to be working out. And finally, one of us got the bright idea of talking to Jerry. And Jerry put us on the right path. He sent us to an attorney who has agriculture in her background, who understands farmers, who is willing to work with a professor, which is very hard to do. Because I had to understand every word in that trust before I would sign it. And Jerry put us together with the right person. And initially we thought, well, we'll take our retirement accounts and we'll set up trusts for our grandchildren through the retirement accounts. And then what was happening is more and more lawyers were getting involved. And we finally said, the hell with it. The whole thing is going to the American Farmland Trust. If we want to give gifts to our grandchildren, we'll do it while we're alive. They'll like us more that way. And we would enjoy that. And then the American Farmland Trust could have everything from the sheep to the furniture, to the tractors, to the house, to the farm, and all of our bank accounts, because where we're going, we're not going to need it. So that was our path, quickly and simply.
Gary, I really appreciate that. I think that that'll resonate with a lot of the folks on the call. So I appreciate you sharing your story and adding a little bit of context to all of the things that you all have gone through over the last few years and your commitment to preserving farmland. So thank you.
Well, we couldn't do it without you.
Wow. We're going to do it. We're going to all do it together. Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind bringing back up the slides, but let's go ahead and start on slide 14. All right, folks, so we're getting towards the end and we want to leave enough time for questions, but I want to remind you that at the top of this hour, we have development staff who are here to proactively reach out to you if you want to connect further. And don't forget, you're going to receive a survey in the next few days where you could win an AFT branded thermos. And just think about that yummy soup or beverage that you can have while you're rocking your AFT branded thermos. That's pretty cool. So go ahead and go to the last slide of the day. Awesome. This is time for questions. We've got about 11 minutes. I know we had some questions in the chat. And so I'll kick us off with one of those questions from the chat, and then we can open it up to the floor. So Paul, this is probably directed to you. From Kathy McHenry, are state level estate taxes assessed based on location of assets, or could one state beneficiary be assessed at a state tax level on assets inherited from another estate in another state, as an example?
Okay, that's a great question. Typically, it's based on where you maintain primary residence. So if you do live in a state that imposes a state level estate tax, and let's say that you lived in Oregon. I was picking on Oregon earlier. I have nothing against my friends in Oregon, but they have that $1 million exemption, and everything above that is 16%. If you owned land in Washington State, just next door, that land in Washington, or that real estate in Washington State would also be part of your estate in Oregon to calculate that state level estate tax. I hope I answered the question, Emily.
For sure. I think that you covered it. And also, Stephanie just popped Paul's email address in the chat. So if you have additional questions specifically to your situation, you can also reach out to him directly. So I saw that Jerry answered a question in the chat around agricultural land considered a non-cash asset. And so thank you for answering that, Jerry. It is definitely an important non-cash asset. But Jerry, do you have any more context to that?
No, other than I think the other point that's relevant is similar to a lot of stocks and bonds. It's generally a highly appreciated asset. So in addition to the tax benefits of a deduction for the generous donation, the taxpayer will also save the capital gains taxes that might be owed if you sold it. So the last thing you would want to do really is sell an appreciated asset, whether it's a farm or appreciated stocks or bonds, and then donate the proceeds. We and you will much be better off if you actually donate the asset itself. And we're happy to work with you to figure out how to make sure that happens correctly.
While we have you on the call, there's another sort of follow-up question to that, and that is around what AFT does with the farmland gifted through the estate plan.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Farm Legacy Program is particularly tailored to sort of productive farm and ranch land. So when we get land donated to us, almost all of the time we will take the property, look for an appropriate buyer. We will resell it, but we will resell it subject to a permanent conservation easement that restricts future subdivision and non-agricultural activities on the farm, and permanently protect it before reselling it. The sale will often be, we're always looking for new and next generation farmers, but in many cases, a lot of folks have longtime tenants. We often work with the current tenant, again, to protect the land and then resell it to that tenant so that they can own it and be able to farm it in the future.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jerry, so much. And Jerry, if you want to put your email address in the chat as well, remember it is on the original slide, so you will get that, but you can reach out to Jerry directly as well. So for Gary and Pam, we have a question for you all. And I love this. You are a beautiful couple. How do you take care of your children through your estate plan while ensuring your devotion to farming is honored? Well,
I think that's a really good question, and it made us think. We thought a great deal about that. The one part of the answer is that we're very fortunate that our children have very, very stable and good incomes and good jobs. I think Pam once said they make more money than God. So they don't really need the money. And they wouldn't know what to do with the farm. I think it would almost be a burden to them, knowing the way we feel about the farm and knowing how little they know about what to do with the farm. So we took the farm off the table. And so just like with our grandchildren, in our living trust, we have the ability to make gifts to anyone we want. And so while we're still alive, we will probably be making gifts to our children as well as to our grandchildren. So they will receive something that will probably be not highly significant to them, because they have a very stable and well-funded lifestyle. But they will at least receive something from us. And while we're still handling the farms, and any remaining assets through the American Farmland Trust, which is where is a great deal of our heart lies. So I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah, that is great. Thank you so much. We had a couple of other questions specific to what kind of farmland can be gifted and who should get this information. And we're happy to follow up with those questions directly with the folks that ask them. I want to make sure that we're paying attention to the chat here as well for the couple of more questions that have come in. So Natalie asks, where can I learn about reaching out directly to farmers, such as the couple who's speaking about their farm? Not specifically them, but someone in our area. As a 39-year-old wanting to get into farming but can't afford it, I know there are grants and loans, but directly connecting to farmers themselves would be meaningful. So she wants to get connected to other farmers.
I'm happy to at least toss out a couple of ideas. One is many farms, states will have what are known as FarmLink sites. So you can find those, it's generally state by state where there may be some current farmers who are looking for someone to work with them, looking for someone to rent their land. You can certainly find, and I noticed my colleague Jamie Pottern is popping in the Farmland info link, which is a great cross-reference. AFT has a great informational website, farmlandinfo.org. You can find access to FarmLink sites across the country, and that's probably one of the best places to start if you know of an AFT regional staff person. They're another good resource, but our Farmland info site is an excellent resource, and shout out to Jamie for being quick on the trigger with that.
Awesome. Right on. And I appreciate that as well. In the last few minutes here, do we have anyone who's interested in coming off of mute and asking a question directly?
I do.
Okay. Hello.
Hi. So I put it in the chat, but I work with farmers every day that are struggling with estate planning, and they're all getting older and that sort of thing. And I know AFT offers a way for them to continue the legacy, but many of them have multiple children, and some are interested and some are not. And they struggle with what's fair and what to do. So do you have resources for that?
There are some resources, again, that could be accessed at the Farmland info site. I'm certainly happy to talk with folks one-on-one who just want to chat about what I see as a very common issue. I label it the fair versus equal conundrum, which happens in many farm and ranch families with multiple children. There's no easy answer there. But sometimes the simplest answer is not the best answer. So there are resources both at farmlandinfo.org, and you can certainly email me. I'm happy to at least have a conversation with someone and hopefully point them in the right direction.
I will absolutely be giving out your information. And if you guys ever do a webinar on that, I will be there, and as many people as I can gather will be there.
Right on. Thank you so much. Well, we are at the top of the hour here. Busy, I see you would like to share the story of protecting your farm. Do you want to close this out?
Just real quick, I'm gonna here in Florida, I'm a big fan of American Farmland Trust. I've actually worked with Jerry Cosgrove on a couple of outreach projects here in Florida, and to answer the question of fair versus equal, I used our family used Jerry's suggestion of life insurance to create equity for my brother. So we have a 100-acre farm, 50 acres goes to me, 50 acres goes to my brother. So that's what happens to most farm families. And so I couldn't afford to buy his 50 acres. So Jerry's, suggestion in his Your Farm is Your Legacy workbook, suggested using life insurance as a way to create fairness and equity for my non-farming brother. And he agreed, and it's in place, and so anyway, it works. So thank God he agreed, because that's the hard part, is getting the non-farming child to go, okay. But he told my mom, it's your farm, you can do whatever you want to with it. So it works.
Well, Busy, we super appreciate you sharing that. What a way to close out this call. We are right at the top of the hour, so we will see you again. This is the first series, the first call in a series. So we'll see you all again in a few months for additional in-depth topics. Some of the ones that were brought up today. Again, look for that post email with the slides, the emails, the notes, all of the things, and then do that survey so we can get some AFT swag in your hand. All right, folks, thanks again. We will see you soon.